Hi, this is Tim Weber from South Texas College and bringing you another video regarding human development. In this video, we'll begin to take up the topic of early childhood, looking at psychological and social development, and we'll also pick up a little bit of information on motor development, physical development as well, just to round that out. So, first of all, when we talk about early childhood, we're generally thinking age 2 through age 6. Okay, so those early years uh, during which children might begin eventually to go to preschool and kinder. So that's what we're talking about here in this chapter. So here's a little bit about the development of motor skills during these years. If you're using the textbook Invitation to the Lifespan, you'll find this in the previous chapter, but I wanted to draw it in because we're not doing that whole chapter. So you can see then development of these motor skills progressing. 2-year-olds able to run without falling, that's an accomplishment, climb out of their crib, walk upstairs, although not down sometimes, feed themselves with a spoon, not very well, but they can get the food somewhere near their mouth, and drawing just spirals. In other words, scribbling on paper. By the time they get to be age 3, typically, they can kick and throw a ball, again, not with any degree of accuracy usually. They can jump with both feet, pedal a tricycle if there's one around, copy real simple shapes on paper, walk downstairs now, so that's a little bit of later development for many kids, and climb simple ladders with supervision, hopefully. At age 4, the typical child can catch a very large ball like a beach ball. They can use scissors, again, hopefully with some supervision. They can hop on one foot at a time on either foot, feed themselves with a fork, dress themselves. Now, the clothes might not match, but they can put the clothes on generally. Copy most letters as well. Pour juice without spilling most of the time, although I'm still working on that myself, and sort of brush your teeth. So they've really progressed there, and notice that they are able to engage in more precise and well-timed movements as it moves on. The typical 5-year-old can skip and gallop in rhythm to music and clap, bang on things, sing along in rhythm. So their sense of rhythm is improving. They also can copy more difficult shapes, more difficult letters. They can climb trees if there are trees available and jump over things. Use a knife to cut something, again, hopefully with supervision. They can learn to tie a bow if there's someone around that can demonstrate how it's done, and throw a ball with somewhat more accuracy, wash their face, and comb their hair as well. Again, maybe not perfectly, but at least kind of going through the motions. The typical 6-year-old is able to finally draw and paint recognizable images. So at that point, often you no longer have to ask them what it is. You can tell by looking at it for once. They can write simple words. Now, scan a page of print. I looked at that and I said, what in the world? Scan a page of print. They can barely read some simple words here at this point. I think what they're saying is like, if you tell the child, well, look through this um, passage of, written words on page and pick out all of the letter B every time there's letter B. Yeah, they can do that. They can scan it to pick out that stuff. That's what they're talking about. Ride a bicycle if there's, again, if there's a bicycle available. Sometimes they can pick it up on their own, although they can usually learn it much more readily if there's someone that can assist them with learning it. Do a cartwheel again if someone has demonstrated this. Tie shoes, yes. Again, this is going to be if there's someone around that can demonstrate how it's done. Catch a baseball, a smaller ball that goes faster as well. So you see a tremendous progression in their motor capabilities through this time period. Now, what you should also take away from this is that if we have a child that is significantly behind on some of these developments, let's say that you have, I don't know, a 5-year-old and they're still having trouble with the things that 4-year-olds typically can do, then we might be a little bit concerned. If they're having trouble doing the things the average child a couple years earlier is doing, we definitely have a problem and need some professional attention to that to help them with their motor skills. So you can sort of gauge it that way and also realize that some of these depend upon having opportunity to learn it. So the child that's never encountered a ball at age 5 is going to have some trouble throwing it, obviously, because of the lack of experience, that sort of thing. So taking all that into account, that'll give you a good gauge of what children should be able to do, and if they are significantly behind, then we have somebody have a look at that, see whether they need some help. Okay, so let's go to Erikson's theory. And he would say the child here is in the stage of initiative versus guilt. And so there is this, as he called it, a crisis that occurs for the child. And they have to overcome this crisis by making it advanced in their social abilities. And so, what's this initiative all about? Well, the initiative is what? The ability to assert their own power and control over their world around them. So, this involves being able to initiate activities and carry those activities to completion with some level of success. And so, if the child begins seeing that they are increasingly developing the abilities and skills to gain control over their environment, then they will have this sense of initiative and they'll be well equipped to move on to the next stage of development. Now, on the other hand, if the child finds that they're unable to achieve some sense of initiative, some sense of power and control over their surroundings, then the result, according to Erikson, is a sense of guilt. There's something wrong with me. I may be even a bad person because I can't do these things that other kids are doing. And so it's important that we give kids the opportunity to end up on the positive side of this. Now, there are some things that equip them well to achieve this sense of initiative. And one is that we see in children this age typically what we call a positivity bias. So they look at themselves in a very positive light. They are very positive about the world and their ability to learn new skills. They're very confident generally that they can achieve what's necessary. So you see typically very positive attitude, high self-esteem. So they generally think of themselves highly, and their self-concept is that they are is typically very high as well. So they may look at something and say, if they can't do it right now, in their mind, well, in no time they're going to get it, and it's going to be no problem. Don't worry, success is just right around the corner in their mind. And so they have then the sense that whatever it is, yeah, I can handle it. I can do it. Yeah. Now sometimes that can be a little bit dangerous. If you leave a kid this age in the car with the motor running, go in the house, you may find the child has put the car into gear thinking that they're capable of driving that car. You say, could you drive mom or dad's car? And their answer will be, oh, sure, I can do it. Just be the opportunity. So you have to kind of watch that and to some extent maybe protect them a little bit about from things like that, but you also have to give them opportunities to try things and to succeed at them as well. Now fortunately, children then also have what we might call protective optimism. as well. So they're optimistic about their ability to gain these new skills. And so even when they do fail, in their mind, hey, if they just try again, they're going to get it. And that's protective because they don't give up before they achieve those new things. So next, we're going to have a look at one of the most important tasks for children during early childhood, and that is developing emotional balance, emotional regulation, the ability to uh, modulate their emotions appropriately and effectively. So, I want to start out with picking up with something you might not find in your textbook, having a look at some basic affective systems. These were first identified by Jake Panksepp in 1994 in a book called Effective Neuroscience, where he summed up all of these neural circuits that neuroscientists had identified that had to do with motivational, emotional factors in people's behavior. And so there's a couple in here that were added later, and I won't go into details about that, but let's just have a look at some of these. Okay, you have this seeking system, and so this produces curiosity, an urge to explore. It produces interest in new things and provides motivation that draws people towards goals. This seeking system also provides a sense of satisfaction when we do move towards a goal where we make progress towards it. So notice this is very important for kids during this age. This motivates them to learn new things and to develop new skills and to get a sense of satisfaction as they progress. There is also then the rage system. So this involves fear. I'm sorry, rage involves anger and anywhere from mild irritation to complete rage. Obviously, this is going to be one emotional system that the youngest children can have a great deal of difficulty with. Their ability to regulate it should improve as they move through um, early childhood. By the way, this is a very important emotion because it does motivate us to protect ourselves or protect those that are in danger. Then there is the fear system as well. So this can produce anything from mild anxiety, nervousness, to sheer terror. Once again, this is one that kids through this age group may have some difficulty getting a handle of. They may have fears of monsters under the bed. Can they get a handle on that so they can go to sleep at night? So on. You have also the lust system. This is the sexual motivation system, also producing satisfaction when satisfied by sexual activity. And we would generally say, well, not too active in children this age, although if you're a Freudian, you believe that the major psychic energy is sexual in nature, although it takes a variety of forms at different ages. So you would see this being active if you're Freudian in various erogenous zone satisfaction type activities and so on. But generally speaking, we say, well, that's not so much a big deal at this age. Um, the care system. So this is the system then that motivates caring for others. And for example, the mother to care for their child. So developing this ability to care for others can be a challenge as well, because not only do we care for our own children, but we care for others that might be in need and so on. So developing that ability is important. Then there is this, oh, I should mention here, care system also is involved with producing bonding between mother and child, parent and child, and others, friendships as well. So again, the functioning of this system is important as well, that it does function so that those bonds do occur and people form those bonds or form friendships. Then you have the panic and grief system. So this is the system that may produce separation anxiety in kids this age, where they become very upset when separated from caregiver or other important person. This also may come into play if the child loses an important figure in their life at this time and coping with that. And then you have this play system motivates, yeah, rough and tumble play, physical interactions with other people of an enjoyable type. And what we're going to find is this is really key to the child's emotional development as well as other areas of development in early childhood. Um, this is the primary way that kids learn, as we're going to find out. And so, this one tremendously important. And then you also have the numerous other motivational states, hunger, thirst, the urge for sleep, the urge for dominance. By the way, later on, some theorists have included that as one of these basic affective systems. And so the child that has, for example, a strong um, tendency towards dominance, can they learn to temper that in such a way that maybe they can be a leader of the game, but not be, domineering to other kids to the point where they don't want to play with them? Or the kid that tends to be just naturally very submissive, the opposite side of dominance, can they develop a little bit more dominance so that other kids can take advantage of them? So notice that regulating all of these emotional and motivational systems is really a complex thing. You know, if one of them is overactive and completely takes over, yeah, you don't really have any ability to think or do anything else. And that happens with very young children very readily. One of these systems may become just totally activated. A child just can't get over that fear that they're feeling or that rage that they're in. Um, or we also look at this and regulating all of this. Yeah, how do we actually integrate these things, not just inhibit the emotions that may not be appropriate at the moment, but how can we bring to action those emotions that we need at the right time? So that's a big task. And we're going to see how kids develop that as we go along here. So emotional regulation, then the ability to produce the appropriate and effective emotions as needed. Impulse control is very closely related to this. Impulse control is controlling your actions, actions that you feel an urge to do. And obviously, if you are able to regulate your emotions effectively, then you also can regulate your actions more readily as well. Now, we should take note that when children are having difficulties achieving emotional regulation, impulse control, if the problem is severe, it may be an indicator of psychopathology, of psychological disorder, mental disorder that may be developing over time. So we have to um, think very carefully about this if we see that the child is having unusual difficulty developing these abilities. Now, when it comes to emotional expression, all kids are going to have some troubles with this pretty much. as they develop these abilities, because in a way it's like developing a skill. And so you will find that some kids, when they are experiencing strong emotions, they will externalize. And so they will act out that emotion. And when that happens, we would say, well, the child is under control. So, for example, the child, when angry, they lash out and they hit other kids and they destroy things and they scream and kick, and you got the idea. That's externalized. The other opposite approach that a child might take when experiencing strong emotions would be to internalize and to simply what hold in that emotion and try to pretend like nothing is going on. In that case, we say, well, the child is over controlled. Now, notice that both of these are hazards. The child that externalizes may hurt themselves and others. They may bring down the wrath of other children and adults that are around them, which could have some dire consequences. And that externalizing action does not help them to really deal effectively with the emotion. The emotion is still a problem. The child that internalizes, on the other hand, may become depressed or may develop an anxiety disorder. They may withdraw and not interact with other kids, and so their social development might suffer. So there are hazards there too. So you might be wondering, well, if neither externalizing nor internalizing is really appropriate in how to deal with an emotion, well, just what is the appropriate way for a child to deal with strong emotions? You might have to think a bit. If you think a bit, you probably will come to the conclusion that, oh, maybe there is a way the child can express the emotion in an appropriate way, particularly maybe what? Letting an adult know that they're having some trouble, an adult who cares and is there to help them to process that emotion, help them work their way through it, and help them to come to a better way of emotional functioning. So basically, what we need to do is we need to impress upon kids that we adults are here and we want to hear about their emotional struggles. If they're having some trouble emotionally, we want to welcome them to talk about it with us. We do not want to discourage them and tell them, I don't want to hear about that. We need to encourage it and then take up that seriously. By the way, when it comes to this externalizing and internalizing, there are gender patterns that we see in this really lifelong. Um, in terms of externalizing, boys tend towards that more. In fact, even as adults, males tend to externalize when faced with strong emotions. Even as adults, uh, guys will do things like what? Get into a fight, go drinking, drive recklessly when feeling strong emotions, more so than women. On the other hand, we see internalizing as being more common with females in childhood as well as adulthood. And again, if we look at adults, women are more likely to hold their emotional troubles in and ruminate about them. In other words, overthink the problem, maybe talking to a friend about it, but then simply going over and over it. That's very common. And so we do see these trends lifelong. Now, it's not 100% by any means, but there is a general tendency in that direction overall. So, how do kids then develop emotional regulation? Well, nature helps them as the prefrontal cortex of their brain begins to develop more, they begin to have more executive control. So, this executive function is the frontal cortex's ability to tamp down emotional responses when they become too severe, to think through situations so that one can maybe modify their emotional response to the situation. So as kids develop these abilities, as their brain matures, they get better control of these emotional and motivational states. Now, there are genetic differences as well that account for why some kids uh, pick this up more readily than others. And one of them genetically is simply, are you male or female? And what you will find is typically girls have an easier time developing emotional regulation and seem to advance, progress at it more quickly than boys. Boys tend to have more troubles with it and tend to be somewhat later in their development than girls. So again, that's a generalization. It's not 100%, but it's typical. Nurture also comes into play in terms of developing emotional regulation, and parental modeling. If parents model appropriate ways to handle their emotions, kids have an easier time of picking that up. On the other hand, if the parent provides poor modeling, let's say every time dad doesn't get his way, he gets angry and then he gets his way. Yeah, kids are going to imitate that. They're going to model their behavior on what the parent does. Also, cultural modeling. So, if within the culture certain emotions are displayed more prominently or are repressed, then what we will see is children will attempt to do that as well. Something that can have a negative impact on the development of emotional regulation would be prenatal neurological damage. So, damage that occurs to brain development due to factors before the child is born, such as prenatal drug abuse, maternal drug abuse, maybe high levels of stress throughout pregnancy on the part of the mother, things of that nature, maybe serious physical problems during the pregnancy. So that neurological damage may make it more difficult for that child to develop emotional regulation. Also, postnatal neurological damage also. So, for example, anoxia during the birth process, which is starvation for oxygen, can cause damage to the brain, or illnesses that attack the brain as well, infections and things like that. Thank God most of those diseases we've got vaccines for, but there's still a few kicking around. That if those occur, that can, or also malnutrition can cause neurological damage as well. So anything that basically impacts normal development of the brain. Now, there are also protective factors as well. And so, even if there are some negatives, the child may be able to develop normal emotional regulations. One of the biggest protective factor is nurturing parents. And that's really important. Now, nurturing might also include some reasonable and consistent discipline as well, but that nurturing can counter stress that might interfere with the development of emotional regulation. So, one of the things that we'll also see is that as we're maybe trying to gauge the child's ability of emotional regulation and impulse control, we can do tests that involve delay of gratification to get some sense of how advanced the child is when it comes to these abilities. So, you've got a video here that demonstrates one of these tests. So, have a look.
Can you put your hands right here on these hands? Good job. And then, this little cup, I'm going to pour an M&M. I'm going to hide it under this cup. And you're going to try and keep your hands here. And I'm going to ring this bell. So you get to get the M&M. Does that sound like fun? Yeah. And Anything with M&Ms is fun, huh? Yeah. Can I put it back? Thank you. I'm okay now. Are we ready to play again? Yeah. Yeah? We'll wait till you chew that M&M, then we'll have another one. Is it good? Yeah. All gone? Yeah. Yeah? Okay. Right, one more time, okay? Put your hand there. Good job. Hide the M&M. And when I ring the bell, what happens? You get the M&M. They ring the bell. Good job. A green one. Yum. Thank you. You ready to do another one? Yeah. We'll wait till you chew that one and then we'll play it again, okay? That's how we play our game. Does that sound like a fun game? Yeah. Yep, okay. Your hands go right there. Good job. Okay, are you all set? Remember, try to wait till I ring the bell to get your M&M, okay? Good job. You waited. A yellow one. Good stuff. Another one? Yeah. Wait till you chew that one, then we'll have another one, okay? Okay. Is this a fun game? Yeah. Yeah. All set? Okay? Okay, here we go. Try and wait till I ring the bell. Good job, Aaron. A red M&M. Put this in here, right here. Cover it with the
watch
cup.
this guy.
You have to wait until I ring the bell, okay? Ready?
Go. That sounds good. Hey, wait a minute.
You didn't wait. But you know what? We're going to try again. But remember, Clint, you have to keep your hands right here. Keep your hands where my hands are. Put your hands where my hands are, okay? Okay, let me have my cup, too, because I need to use it to play. Okay. Wait. We got to put the M&M right here. I'm going to cover it with the cup, and you have to wait till I ring the bell, okay? Ready?
Here he goes. Okay, so do we have to even discuss which child had a greater handle on emotional regulation and impulse control? Obviously, the little girl did. And so in my classes in the classroom, I always ask, you say, well, is there any things that you would see there that might help to explain in part why the difference is? And sometimes I say, well, the little boy seemed to be a bit younger. I said, yes, that's true. Being a bit younger, we might be able to give him a little bit of a break. And then others might say, well, also he's a boy and it takes a little longer to develop emotional regulation. I said, yes. But even then, we would say, well, this is not really with it. His behavior is not within the norms of emotional regulation for that age, and that might cause us some concern. He's going to have some difficulties In fact, I don't know if you noticed, but you might have noticed his speech seemed to be also much less advanced as well. So there may be some neurological difficulties that he's encountering that may be interfering both with speech development as well as emotional regulation and impulse control. This is a child that probably needs some attention to see if we can identify what the problem is and how we can help him. Okay, so just a little illustration there. Now, when it comes to developing emotional regulation, another thing we haven't discussed that plays a part in this is the development of empathy. So, empathy is the ability to put yourself in the other person's place mentally, to imagine how the other person might feel, what they might be going through. And empathy then leads to pro-social behavior. In other words, behavior that benefits others, that's designed to, that's intended to be helpful and concerning for others. Typically, children develop greater empathy as they go from age 3 through 6. This develops. Now, on the other hand, failure to develop empathy may actually result in the development of antipathy, which is what? A dislike for others, ill feelings towards others, wishes for bad things to happen to other people, harm to come to other people. And that tends to lead to antisocial behavior. Now, what we mean by antisocial here is behavior that's intended to hurt other people and harm them. We're not talking about withdrawing, but rather intending to harm other people. So typically, antipathy is part of the game when you're a baby. You got that built in, but it typically decreases beginning at age 2, tapers off. So we can also see in a video here how empathy develops as children get older by looking at children of different ages and how they would handle receiving a disappointing gift. So let's check out this video about the disappointing gift task.
You open the gift, it's a piece of coal. What would you do?
Cry.
You'd cry. Why would you cry?
'Cause I don't like those kind of presents.
I understand. And what would you tell your aunt?
I would tell her that I didn't want it that.
You like Barbie dolls?
No.
No. Okay, so you got a Barbie doll. And your grandma gave you the Barbie doll. How would you feel?
So upset, and I'll jump and stomp my feet and I'll say, I hate that present, and I'll break it to pieces.
Now, what if your grandma was right there? Let's say your grandma thought you'd really like this gift. How would you respond? Grandmom's right there. She gives you the gift. You open it up, and it's a Barbie doll. What would you do?
I'll give it to my sister.
You'd give it to your sister. What would you tell your grandma?
That present is only for girls, not for boys.
Yeah? Would you scream and jump up and down if Grandmom was right there?
Yes, because I hate Barbie dolls.
Just pretend your grandmother got you this lump of coal. Your grandmother really thinks this is a good gift, but it's not a good gift. It's really a bad gift. And she's right there, and you open the package, and you look in, and there's this piece of coal. And she's right there. What would you do? What would you say?
I wouldn't say anything. I'd just say, thanks for the gift.
Yeah. And then when she's not around, what would you do with the gift?
Well, maybe it would be returnable.
Now imagine your grandmother gets you a gift, and it's like really a bad gift. How would you react if you opened the gift and you saw that there was a Barbie doll there?
First of all, well, I'll kind of not tell her because I don't want to break her heart, because it's like the thought that counts, no matter what she gets you.
Right.
So what I'll do is keep it aside and wait for my birthday, and she'll get me something right, hopefully.
Now, if she was in the room, she actually gave you the gift and you opened it up, what would you do?
I will be like, thanks, Grandma. You shouldn't have.
I just love that young man's answer. So clever. But, yeah. So as you can see there, as children get older, generally they're able to have greater insight into how people are going to feel when they do something and how they're going to respond to it emotionally. And so they're able to then also modulate their behavior so that they can care for others' emotions effectively as well. So that's very important in emotional regulation. Now, let's also have a little closer look at the um, aggression and how that plays a part in early childhood. And with all children, we're going to see some aggression. We can classify it into a number of types. Instrumental aggression is the aggression is an instrument to achieve some goal. So the child that hits another child so that they can take away their toy. The aggression is a tool for trying to achieve some goal. We also will see amongst kids this age sometimes reactive aggression. Reactive aggression, they are reacting to something that another child has done to them. And of course, that's a classic. The classic thing is, yeah, why'd you hit your brother? Well, he hit me first, right? That's reactive aggression. We also see relational aggression. This is an aggression that maybe is not physical, but rather is intended to ruin the other person's relationships with others. So that might involve spreading rumors about another child, or maybe telling parents that that child had done something they weren't supposed to when they didn't do it. Um, and then we also see that bullying can occur, that a child can engage in repeated victimization of specific other victims as well. All of these can be seen to occur in this age group. Now, normally children will begin mastering these aggressive urges as they experience brain maturation through this time period. They will get these urges under control, and also through the give and take that occurs interacting with their parents and as they interact with other kids in preschool or kinder. And so, of course, we would say, yes, discipline and being taught how to behave is important. Modeling is important. Uh, but you know, one of the things that often isn't considered is they often learn to manage their aggressive urges through interactions with other children. Other children actually teach them. And you say, well, how is that? Well, here's how. If a child is unusually aggressive, other kids often don't want to play with them. They're not fun to be around. They're too mean. That's not any fun. So that child then finds himself to be isolated and ostracized by the other kids. And then finally they learn that, oh, it's because they're too aggressive. Well, maybe if I play nice with the other kids, yeah, I'll get to participate with them. They'll let me play with them. And so it actually is often taught them by other kids. What we should also recognize is that if a child reaches age 5 and they are just uncontrollably aggressive, that's not normal. Okay. And so, in fact, we need to know that if we don't bring that aggressive behavior under control by the time they get to the end of early childhood, then as they get into middle childhood, they are likely to experience academic problems, social deficits, academic problems because they can't function in school environment due to being overly aggressive, social deficits, inability to make friends, and to interact with other kids, which they will probably desire tremendously, but not be able to. So we need to, if we see this coming, we need to take steps to help that child learn to control that aggressive behavior. Okay, so just moving on to motivation in early childhood. Again, we're looking at what children age 2 through 6. Extrinsic motivation is motivation that comes from outside the person. So this would be motivation in the form of rewards or punishments. So extrinsic motivation is coming from others or from the person's environment. Intrinsic motivation is where one does something motivated simply by, well, I don't know, I like that activity. I just enjoy doing it. It's fun. Comes from within. One of the things we should know is that kids in early childhood have a tremendous amount of intrinsic motivation. There are so many things that they enjoy doing, and they enjoy learning new things. And that really helps them advance in the various skills that they're trying to develop at that point. So often we don't need to use a lot of extrinsic motivation and threats or rewards because kids are so intrinsically motivated. Now, in fact, we can actually destroy intrinsic motivation um, by providing extrinsic motivation in some cases. You say, what do you mean? Well, okay. Let me tell you about a particular study that was done. They took a group of children that loved to draw. They all enjoyed drawing a lot. And so they then tracked how many minutes a day on average these kids drew pictures. So that gave them a baseline that behavior. Then they divided the kids into 3 groups, and one group of kids, everything was the same except for this group of kids. They were promised a reward if they drew a picture, and every time they drew, they would get a reward. Second group of kids, no reward was promised, but when the kids were drawing at certain points, just out of the blue, they received a reward. The third group of kids, they did nothing. Okay, there were no rewards. They just simply observed how much these kids drew. So what happened as a result in terms of how many minutes a day children drew? Um, which group of children um, drew more? Well, turns out that the kids that nothing was promised, but occasionally when they were drawing, they received a reward. They did draw a little bit more, but it wasn't much. The kids that they didn't do anything, they continued to draw at roughly the same number of minutes a day, no real change. Now, what about that group of kids that they promised a reward for drawing and then they got a reward each time they drew? You would think they were going to draw more, right? That's what behaviorists would predict. You know, if the consequence of the behavior is something pleasant and so on, you're going to do it more. But the reality is the kids that were promised a reward and given it actually drew less. You say, why is that? Well, think about it. What was going on in their thinking? They probably began saying to themselves, you know what? Uh, I guess I maybe don't like drawing as much as I thought. I guess I'm just doing it to get the candy. And maybe you've experienced something like this. If we put it at a more adult level, you might be able to relate to that. So maybe you just love playing a particular sport, but you know what? When you become a professional athlete and you have to perform, um, a lot of professional athletes actually say, I enjoyed the sport more when I did it as an amateur, before I was doing it for the reward. Maybe you love fishing, but if you become a professional fisherman, there's going to be some days you'd say, I really don't want to get out there to go fishing, but I have to because I'm doing it to get the reward. So you can see that, yeah, actually promising and providing rewards when a person is already motivated to do that action can actually interfere with the person's natural motivation. Now, that said, um, in some cases, children may not be intrinsically motivated for important tasks that they need to learn to do, such as what, maybe cleaning up their room. We can then use extrinsic motivation to get them into that behavior, but we can also begin to move them from extrinsic to intrinsic motivation as we do that. You say, well, how is that done? Yeah, I'd like it if my child someday will enjoy cleaning up their room and so on. And here's how you do it. Okay, so at first, when you're getting them to learn the task, you're going to pick out one simple part of the task. Okay, so all right, we're going to clean up your room. So, okay, you see that teddy bear laying there on the floor. There's a space right up there on the shelf. You see that space? Yeah. You think you can put it up there? Okay, very good. You did it. And so here's a hug. And oh, maybe let's go have a cookie. Yeah, right. So you're using extrinsic motivation, some praise, and you're using some food, and then you teach them each part of the task. And the next time it's picking up the teddy bear and maybe another item and so on until they now learn all of the items that are part of the task. Now, each time you're providing maybe some extra motivation, but once they know the entire task and they're doing it consistently in order to get that reward, then you begin to thin out the reward and you say, well, you know what? Now you're doing that so consistently, you're a big boy, you're a big girl, and you know what? I think uh, if you do it today and tomorrow, and you do a good job, then we're going to do something nice. And you start thinning out the reinforcement a little bit, and then you move on to spacing it out more and more. And but you also accompany this with and praising them in terms of uh, wow, you're really becoming so grown up. Yes, you're really learning what us big people do, you know, and so on. So they begin to think of themselves as this is part of their self-image, and this is part of what they do as a more mature person. And so after a while, as you thin out the reinforcement more and more, it becomes a habit, one, and it becomes part of their self-image, two, that they're proud of. And yeah, you may find that they simply do it on their own in order to maintain that image of themselves, kind of person they are. So, okay. Now, I don't know why I threw imaginary friends down at the bottom of this. Oh, yeah, okay, I know why I put it in there. Yeah, okay. So kids this age, frequently they do have imaginary friends, you know, particularly if there's not another lot of kids around, other kids. And it's pretty much perfectly normal this age. And so they'll play with those imaginary friends. Now, um, why do they develop these imaginary friends? Well, because they're highly motivated to interact with others, and if others aren't around, well, they'll invent people to interact with. And when they do this, this also enables them to try out various ways of interacting with their imaginary friends. So this is helping them with their social development as well. But what's motivating it? The urge to interact with other people, very powerful motivation. Okay, so let's shift to cognition during early childhood, and particularly the development of thinking as observed by Jean Piaget. And so he considers this time to be what he called the preoperational thought period, preoperational thinking. So the big advance here over babies and toddlers is that there is the development of symbolic thinking. So when you get into early childhood, now you can think of things as representing something else. So you can think of a doll as representing a person, a toy truck as representing a real truck. You can even think of words as symbolizing things and actions. So notice the development of language ability relies on symbolic thinking to a great extent. As kids get a little bit older, letters on a page become symbols as well for actual words, and so on and so forth. So that's a big advance when you could think this way. So characteristics of preoperational thought that Piaget observed in his experiments include centration. So the child will center their attention on the most noticeable things about an item or object. So what is most obvious about it? You know, if they're seeing a bunch of people and there's a man with long hair, they might consider that man to be a woman because, well, the most noticeable thing about them is the hair. That's easy for the child to notice, but maybe not so easy for them to notice the rest of their body structures. So they'll tend to focus in on one thing and ignore other aspects of the thing. Also, egocentrism is characteristic of their thinking. Now, what do we mean by this is that they think everybody sees things just the way they do, and everybody feels the way they do. Everybody likes what they do. So in early childhood, you're going to get mom a gift. What will the child pick out? Whatever they like. They assume mom or dad is going to like what they like. Also, they focus on appearance rather than other more subtle aspects of a thing. Okay, so the outward appearance rather than others. Now, irreversibility is also typical of their thinking. So they don't recognize that you can perform many processes and then you can reverse the process and put the thing back the way it was before. Now, that might explain something that you've observed. Maybe you make the child in this age group a sandwich and they reject the sandwich. They don't want it. Why don't you want it? Well, it's got pickles on it. And you say, oh, that's easy. I'll just take the pickles off of it. It'll be just fine. Do they want it then? No, they don't want it. In their mind, it's not reversible and the sandwich will never be the same. And so they won't eat that because it had a pickle on there. You can't reverse it, you see, in their mind. Also, they engage in static reasoning. So in their way of thinking, things always are as they are now. They always were that way, and they always will be. So when you talk to them about, well, when grandma was a little girl, that really just doesn't register with them. They really can't imagine that. Or you say, when you grow up and you're an adult, and they again can't fully register that as well. So they don't have an awareness that things progress as time passes as we do, at least not fully. Also, they have difficulty with various conservation type tasks, as we'll see in the next slide. And animism is very typical of their thinking as well. You know, so even inanimate objects to them have kind of like a personality and characteristics of living things. So, you know, why is it raining while the clouds are crying? Or if they bump into the table leg, that's a bad table. That table intended to hurt me, you know, and so they just attribute. Okay. So here's the bit about conservation tasks, all right? So you take a glass of water, kids this age, and you pour that glass of water into a taller but thinner glass, which glass has more. Kids this age usually will choose the taller one, even though it's the same amount of water. You just poured it from one glass to another. They don't recognize that it remains the same. Or in terms of conservation of number, you take a certain number of checkers and you line them up, two lines of equal number, and then you space out the checkers in one line. They now believe that the longer line has more checkers. You take two balls of clay equal size and you make one into a long snake-like shape, and they now estimate that the longer one, it's more. Okay, which is kind of wondering, when I was in kinder, I always would make my clay into a big long thing like that, a snake, and maybe I thought I was getting more. I don't know. In terms of length, take two sticks of equal length and then you move one forward, and they will believe that the one that is more forward is now longer. So this is what Piaget observed. Now, I'll tell you that when I first studied this in graduate school, um, my kids were actually in this age group, and I thought, I'm going to try this out. Now they were towards the end of the early childhood, but they were still in early childhood. And so I did the thing with the glass and so on. And I was kind of surprised because, well, they actually were able to understand conservation of this. And so here's what I think. I think Piaget simply observed children who didn't really have maybe anyone who was kind of coaching them about these things, and so they hadn't yet discovered it for themselves. But if kids have have adults around that are kind of coaching them about these things and teaching them about that, the child may actually pick up these abilities in terms of conservation earlier. I think that's what happened with my kids and why they could do it. And so that brings us to the next little section to contrast the ideas of Vygotsky with those of Piaget that we just saw. So Vygotsky keyed in on how people learn due to their social and their cultural context. And so in his view, children learn through what he called an apprenticeship in thinking. So the children were coached, were apprenticed to more experienced members of their culture who then mentored them and brought them along, coached them in their thinking as well as developing physical skills. So for this to work, the child needed a mentor that could work with them in what he called their zone of proximal development. So the mentor then structures the learning and provides the child with tasks that they can move up to with some guidance. So things that are within reach, but are not too simple nor too difficult. And if that is done, the child can advance up to the next level. Now, on the other hand, a good mentor is not going to work with the child in this quadrant here, or well, this, whatever you want to call it, where it's what they already know. The child is going to get bored and say, I don't like learning, it's boring. Okay, it has to be challenging enough that it makes it interesting. On the other hand, they cannot work with them outside of this zone of proximal development in areas that are too difficult. The child is not ready for or able to learn yet, because then the child will simply become frustrated and give up and say, again, this is no fun. So this zone of proximal development is very critical to development of skills beyond what Piaget predicted. So notice then that part of this whole process is the mentor then provides scaffolding of tasks. So scaffolding, if you're familiar with the construction business, is those platforms where you have a ladder, you climb up to one level and you can work there, and then you add another level and you move up to the next level and you build the wall higher, and then you add another level to your scaffold and you build up the next level and so forth. So in learning, then scaffolding is taking those tasks, starting with the most simple ones, the most basic, and then providing the child a chance to helping them to master each level and then moving up to the next level. So structuring the learning tasks for the child, very important when it comes to this social learning. Now, even thinking can be taught through this process of mentoring, and here's how it happens. Now, first of all, we know that we all engage in private speech. Yeah, that's that internal dialogue where we're talking to ourselves in our head. Yeah, we all do that, right? So then the advances in thinking then come as we are coached by others in how to think. And so this goes from verbalizing the uh, thinking skill to eventually internalizing it. So how does that work? Okay. So when a child is first learning a task, the mentor provides actual what? Instructions on how to do that particular task. If it's tying shoes, you cross the shoelace over and then you do this and then you do that, right? And if you notice when kids are first learning things like that, as they're practicing it, they will what? Verbalize those instructions that their adult mentor has used. They'll actually say those steps out loud. And by the way, even you as an adult, when you're doing a very, very difficult task, you may catch yourself actually again instructing yourself about what to do next and saying it out loud. So we even as adults may do that. But anyways, so well, what happens as the child becomes more familiar with that task and has done it successfully numerous times, they begin to internalize the instructions. And they begin to, rather than saying every step out loud, just thinking it. And so they have gone from external instructions to internal dialogue now. The same thing then would go for how you think about things. At first, the child simply repeats what others tell them about how things work. But after they've said that a number of times, eventually they begin to internalize that and they begin to think that way. And so in their mind, they came up with that themselves, but really what did they do? They verbalized what others had told them about how the world works, and then eventually they internalized that as their own way of thinking. So thinking, according to Vygotsky, actually happens through the process of, as he called it, social mediation, by actually being sort of mentored in our thinking by others. Now, Vygotsky also pointed out that language influences how people think as well. So whatever language your culture group uses can influence how you think. And many of you, I know, are bilingual in English and Spanish. And so maybe you have some insight into that. And I'll ask students, I'll say, yeah, if you're thinking about something in English, do you think a bit differently than if you're thinking about it in Spanish? And sometimes they'll kind of go, oh, I don't know. And then someone will say, yeah, I think so. But some of that, I'm not so sure about that. Well, how about this? If you are wanting to express your emotions, say your love for someone, which language enables you to express that more completely and more fully? And almost always, bilingual students will say, well, Spanish is so much better for that. There's just so many more words to use that it's geared for it. Yeah, okay. And in fact, expressing emotions of any sort, they will say Spanish seems to be more suited for that. Now, on the other hand, if you're thinking about, say, um, engineering or something like that, then which language seems to be preferred in most students who are bilingual? Say, well, probably English is better suited for that. It's more kind of matter of fact, factual, geared towards that. And so, yes, which language you end up grow up speaking may have an influence on whether emotions are more in the forefront or whether it's more cold, hard reality thinking that tends to take the forefront. It may be somewhat influenced by your predominant language. It's something to think about. I think maybe Vygotsky has a little something there. Okay, so moving on. Let's have a look at children's theories about things. Yes, they develop their own theories about how things work. And they do this by mostly asking adults, although they come up with a lot of that on their own. But if you notice, they're always asking why. They want to have a theory about everything about how it works. And so the textbook calls this the theory, okay? One of the theories that they're developing is theory of mind, and that is they're developing an understanding of how other people think, how other people feel, the experiences that other people are having. And that develops slowly through early childhood. So the 2-year-old doesn't have much idea about how other people think or feel, but by the time you get to age 6, you may have some grasp of that by that time. So this is a developing ability. Okay, so we covered a lot here, and we're going to end there. And I want you to tune in for part 2, because part 2, we're going to take up the importance of play. We're also going to have a look at different kinds of play. We're going to have a look at parenting or caregiving styles and the influence of each of these, as well as how successful they appear to be in various cultural settings. Some look at the influence of media on children as well. We'll be having a look at moral development and child discipline, the use of various types of discipline, and also child maltreatment. So a whole bunch of stuff coming in part 2. So please tune in for that. We're going to quit there and have a great day.